Tired, but fine.
Sure, that's normal. It means you're normal. Okay, so new chapter. Gid Hanasha, probably in English translated as the sciatic nerve. So Gid Hanasha Noheg, where does it apply? It applies in Eretz Yisrael, in Israel, Uba Chutzlaretz, and in the exile outside of Israel. Ubifnei Abayis, Vishlo Bifnei Abayis. When we had a temple, when there's no temple. Bechulin Ube Mukdashin. That's going to be the big discussion for the next page, at least. This idea that it applies by a mundane animal and by a holy animal. Well, yeah, why would you think it doesn't apply? So, the noheg bebehema ubechaya, it applies both by a domestic and a wild animal. Notice the omission of a bird. A bird doesn't have really, we'll see it's a certain shape, a circle under the thigh. Oh, you have a nice picture. Wow. Ooh, Oh, so that kaf, that spoon on the thigh, as they say. So that doesn't exist by a bird. That's only by the animals. And this is going to be a debate. We actually had this a little bit earlier. B'yerech shel yamin u'b'yerech shel smol. Our Mishnah holds it applies both to the right and the left eye. The eino noeg ba'ov. Oh, here we go. And does not apply by a bird. Mipnei she'ein lo kaf. That's your picture with the spoon. You see, it says the spoon. Oh, color. Wow. Color. Kaf hayerech, spoon on the thigh. Get a nasha sciatic nerve. And under that is the spoon on the thigh. Right, it sounds like it's right next to the femur. Right next to the femur, the thigh bone, is this spoon on the thigh. Okay. Wow, good picture. Steve's quite an artist. So, okay. The noheg v'shalil, if you shack the animal and there's a 9-month fetus inside, there would also be a prohibition. There'd also be a prohibition in that 9-month fetus. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, nope, eino noheg b'shalil. It does not apply. And we'll see exactly what that debate is. The chelvo mutter, the chelev of the fetus is permitted. Okay. Forbidden fats are not going to apply to the 9-month fetus found inside the animal. Okay. The ein hatavachin ne'amanin al gid anasha, divrei Rev Meir. You go and get an animal from the shochet. So you obviously want to know, did you remove the sciatic nerve? The guy tells you, of course. So we don't believe him. The chachamim omrim, he is believed. Ne'amanim alav v'ala chelev. Not only we believe him for that, we believe him also that he's removed all the prohibited fat. So a debate, Rav Meir and the chachamim, do we believe the shochet, yes or no? So we have to see what that's about. Okay, so the question that the Gemara is going to be bothered by for a while is, it says that Gid Hanasha applies to sacrificial animals. So the first question is, Mukdashin Pshita, Mishum de Akdashe Pakale Isser Gid Hanasha? Pakale Isser Gid Minei? I don't understand. The animal is born, and it has a prohibition that you can't eat the sciatic nerve. And now, a few months into its life, you decide you want to bring it as a sin offering. So you say, okay, Rebbe, you're going to be my sin offering. So what happened to the prohibition of sciatic nerve? Well, it flew away? What does that mean? So why would you think it would not be prohibited? So now we're going to be touching upon, without stating explicitly, this whole idea of that in many cases there's a concept called ein isser chal al isser, that once you have one prohibition, so then there's no room, so to speak, for another prohibition to land on the animal, unless it's a more expansive prohibition, unless it's a stricter prohibition, applies to a wider variety of people. But that's the basic rule, is that if there's a prohibition, another one is not gonna go. So now,
Another nerve, femoral nerve, or the peroneal nerve. runs almost in parallel to the sciatic nerve.
Mm-hmm.
Why not that?
I found that very well this year, 5 months ago, where the sciatic nerve is.
Oh,
Right here.
oh,
Yeah, but it went away, thank God. So not the nerve, the pain. The nerve is still there. So the tema. So maybe you'll say that there's a good reason to think that there is no prohibition of the sciatic nerve by a sacrificial animal. Why would you think that? The tema, and there's going to be a discussion later. Yesh begidin b'no Saint Tam. So we're going to have hopefully a lot of the fundamentals in the laws of kashrus are going to come up in about I don't know 6 to 9 pages. And the discussion is that we're always worried about transferring of taste. Every time your dairy fork goes into your meat pod, and the question always is, how did it taste transfer? How did the taste in the meat pot go into my dairy fork? How does that work? When does it work? You put stuff in the oven. Okay, therefore what? How does putting 2 things in the oven all of a sudden make one thing not kosher? How did taste transfer? That's what we're looking for. So there's a discussion by bones and sinews, those things. Now, if it's meaty, it's called a moach. It has the marrow. Thank you. Then that's obviously there is meat taste in that, chicken taste in that. But the question is, when you have things that are not like that, more dry bones and sinews, so do we say that those give over taste as well? Yes or no? So it sounds like that they're in the regular bone, there is some level of taste. We call Kollel, very weak taste. Sounds like the question. So there's 2 opinions. Does that give over taste or not? Is there enough in there that it can transfer? So it comes up in 2 places at least, transferring taste. And 1, if it doesn't transfer any taste, can you count it as part of the 60 times to nullify? So let's say you have meat and then you have milk falls in. So you have meat and then you have the bones of the meat. What status are those bones? Do those bones, if they're not contributing taste, can they dilute it and be part of the nullification? Let's say you have something not kosher falls in, a non-kosher bone, piece of meat on the bone falls into your chulin. So now you want to know, is there 60 times kosher chulin to the 1 little piece of non-kosher chulin? Okay, so how do you look at it? The meat, what about the bones? How does the bones fit into that? Let's say you have 58 times the meat, but no, it'd be a bad example. You have 60 times. How did it go? You would have, let's say you have 58 times kosher food against non-kosher meat, but now you have these bones. So maybe the bones can team up with the kosher side and nullify the meat, and then you're good to go. Because the bones don't give off any taste, but maybe they could dilute it. Maybe they could take it. So anyways, the point is that bones is a big discussion. Bones and sinews, what you do with it. So right now we're saying, maybe you'll say, according to the opinion, yesh begidin bin no tam, that there's an opinion that the sinews give off taste. They give off flavor. So that means if your gid hanasha, your sciatica nerve falls into your soup, or to your chulin. So after you fire the chef, no. So probably your wife, no. So so the question is according to the opinion that says that the sciatica gives off flavor. So what's going to happen now? The asi iser mukdashin v'chayil iser gid. So then you'll say that maybe it's all of a chitema. Maybe you'll say that if the sciatica gives off taste, so now once it gives off taste, how does that help you? Because now, if it became a sacrifice, so now there's a prohibition to get benefit from sacrifices. But it's only considered getting benefit, it sounds like, if they give off flavor. So if you have an animal that you made a sacrifice, the sciatica is only going to be prohibited to consume if it gives off flavor. If it doesn't give off flavor, it's like eating a stick. So that's the Gemara's current assumption, that maybe our Mishnah is saying that when you eat a gid anasha, which is also sacrificial, meaning it's of a sacrifice. If you eat a sciatica nerve of a sacrifice, you'll get 2 sets of lashes. 1 for the sciatica, and the other one because it's a sacrifice, and therefore the sacrifice has some taste to it, this piece, and therefore you're not allowed to eat from it. It's considered benefiting from sacrifices. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay, fine. So maybe that's what our Mishnah is talking about, and that's the novelty. That you're liable 2 sets of lashes. So says the Gemara. So if that would be true, we have a phraseology issue. It should have stated, if that was the novelty in the Mishnah, it should have made that very clear. It should have said, Hayimukdashin noheg begid, that the prohibition of benefiting from sacrifices applies even to the sciatica, mibayile. That's the way it should have phrased it. And since it didn't phrase it that way, it seems to tell us that there's another novelty in our Mishnah, and now we're going to try to figure out. So maybe you'll say, Ela Kasavar the other way. Ein begidin beno Saint Tam. Really like the other opinion we're going to see coming up in 10 pages. That really there is no flavor given over by sinews, by bones. They don't give off flavor. Okay. Ubemukdashin, ein begidin beno Saint Tam. Ubemukdashin, Isser Gid Ika, and Isser Mukdashin Leka. And by sacrifices, there's only a prohibition of if you would eat the sciatica of a sacrifice, you're only violating one prohibition of eating the sciatica, not eating the sciatica of the sacrifice, because it doesn't apply because it doesn't give off flavor. Therefore, we don't view you as benefiting from the sacrifice. Okay, our Mishnah says it applies by sacrifices. What does that mean? The Savar Tanadidan. One second. So the Mishnah is just saying, the Mishnah is teaching you that there is no taste by the sinew. Meaning, the Mishnah says the sciatica applies by the holy sacrifices, by sacrifices. It's coming to tell you the only prohibition that applies to the sacrifices is the prohibition of the sciatica, and not benefiting from sacrifices. Right? If I were to go eat from a chatas for my own personal benefit, that's a prohibition. That's called me'ila. If I do it inadvertently, I can't benefit from. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to Hashem. So the Mishnah is teaching you, if you eat a sciatica of a sacrifice, you're only liable for one thing, the sciatica, not for benefiting from the sacrifices. What's the novelty in that? The novelty is to teach you, our Mishnah holds, like the opinion, that the sciatica and the bones do not give off flavor. Because if they would have given off flavor, then you would have been liable 2 sets of lashes. One for benefiting from the sacrifices, because you're tasting some taste of the sciatica, but that taste doesn't belong to you; it belongs to Hashem. So that's what. But if that would have been the novelty, it should have phrased it differently. From the fact that it didn't, must be that we're really saying that our Mishnah holds there is no taste transfer by the sciatica, and therefore, if you would eat a sciatica of a sacrifice, the only thing you'd be liable for is the prohibition of the sciatica and not benefiting from the sacrifice. Now, the Savar Tanadidan ain't begidin beno Saint Tam. And that's a novelty of our Mishnah. That's what we hold, that sinews, bones don't give off taste. But the Mishnah later on says, V'hatnan, Yerech Shiniz Bashel Ba Gid Hanasha, a thigh of the animal, which is cooked with the Gid Hanasha. So one of the ways you transfer taste is through cooking. Water. It's the way I asked somebody this, how do you think it transfers? Because it's like impurity, it just goes. I was like, no, it doesn't just go. You have to have water transfer it. When you cook something, cooking is always with water. Baking, frying, roasting is something else. Maybe it's the same, maybe it's not, but that's not water. Cooking's only with water. So when you have 2 things that are prohibited, for example, a thigh of an animal and the sciatica. Thigh is permitted, sciatica is prohibited. Now you cook them together. So now what it does is the water takes the taste, the water with the heat, the water that's heated up, that it takes the water or liquids, they take the frying is a question because it's only a little bit of oil. Deep frying is more oil. Yeah, but water will take the prohibited taste and transfer it from the sciatica to the thigh, and that's why any case of a pot cooking something, when something falls in, that's what we're worried about, that the heat transfer. And then, oh, 1 second, but this was dairy, that was meat. How does that work? So what does the Mishnah tell us though? If a thigh is cooked with the sciatica, well, it should depend, right? If the sciatica can give off flavor, then it'll prohibit the thigh. If it does not give off flavor, then it does not affect the thigh at all. The sciatica you can't eat, but it never gave over any flavor to the thigh. And yet, what does the Mishnah say? If there is less than 60 times thigh corresponding to the sciatica, if there's less than 60, which means that there is taste that's transferred, right? Another qualification, even if you transfer taste, but you can't get nullified, and even if you transfer taste, but if you have 60 times permitted substance corresponding to your prohibited substance, then you're nullified. So that's a 0. So the Mishnah says, if there's enough to give over flavor, which means less than 60 times thigh corresponding to the sciatica, so then hareza asura, then it's prohibited. So if you have one static nerve falls in, so there's only 5 times more thigh in the soup, and we're saying now that the sciatica gives over flavor, it'll make the thigh prohibited. So it says the Gemara, you have one Mishnah here that says that you want to tell me now the novelty is that the sciatica does not give over flavor. You have another Mishnah and a few Mishnahs from now that tells you clearly, black on white, it does give over flavor. So it's not logical to say that it should be 2 different authors. That we'd rather not resort to that. Rather, we have to find a new novelty of our Mishnah. So third attempt. Elahacha bevlados kachim askina. So we're talking about vlados kachim. An animal gives birth. When an animal gives birth to another, a sacrificial animal gives birth to another animal, that animal is also sanctified. So let's say a shlamim, achatas, and ola now gives birth. Before you brought up on the altar, it gives birth. Because it can't give birth after you brought up on the altar. So before you bring it on the altar, it gives birth. So that animal is holy. Elahacha bivlados kachim askina. Okay, so the animal gives birth. Vika savar noheg bishalil. And our Mishnah says that the prohibition of the sciatica applies to a 9-month fetus. Vika savar vlados kachim b'me'ei iman hein kedoshim. The iser gid, the iser mukdashin, v'hadi hadadi kaasi. A real mouthful. So the case we're saying now is a case where the animal gave birth. 1, 2. We're saying that the prohibition of Giranasha will apply even in utero. And 3, we're saying that when does a animal become holy? Do you say that when the shlamim gives birth, it only becomes holy once it comes out of the womb, or it even becomes holy in utero? So it's interesting. In I don't know if it's a modern Hebrew, but in the way you speak about somebody who's like a really holy person that you feel is holy from birth. Say he was kadosh mirachem. He was holy from the womb. Someone that's interesting. That's the way you certain big people. Yeah, he was kadosh. The whole time. He never even had one thought to do anything wrong. So now once these 3 cases are true, what happened now? The prohibition of the sciatic nerve and when it became holy, they happened simultaneously, because in the womb, once it was developed, now you have a prohibition of sciatic nerve. It's also now holy. So if you go with those assumptions, what happens? The 2 prohibitions came together at the same time, and therefore you avoided this halachic problem of one prohibition can't take effect as long as there's another prohibition there. So they both come at the same time. Okay, but now on this we're asking, Umi matzes mukmas la b'shalil. Okay, let's look at the Mishnah. How could you tell me that first part of the Mishnah is talking about in utero, the end of the Mishnah is talking about in utero, implying that the beginning of the Mishnah is not talking about in utero. So, sounds like the beginning of the Mishnah, which says that there's a prohibition of the sciatica applies even to sacrifices, doesn't mention utero. The utero is only mentioned 2 lines later, 3 lines later, implying that that point in the Mishnah, we're not talking about utero, and therefore we're back to the drawing board. What's the novelty of our Mishnah? What's the case? So says the Gemara, no. The beginning of the Mishnah is also talking about in utero, and hachikamer. This I have to read it. Davar zeh machlok is the Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanon, that which the Mishnah mentioned originally is talking about in utero, and it happens to be a debate, Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis. And then later on in the Mishnah, it explains that it's actually a debate, meaning the Mishnah originally mentioned this idea that it applies by sacrifices. That is talking about in utero. Later on, it tells you this in utero, you should know, is a debate, Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. But it's not going to tell you that earlier in the Mishnah, it's not talking about in utero. It just doesn't mention that it's a debate. But it's referring to utero. Later in the Mishnah, it tells you that it's not according to everybody. It's actually a debate. Rabbi Yehuda says it does not apply, and the rabbis say it does apply. Yeah. Okay. Now, we're going to ask on this again. One second. We're making an assumption that as long as everything happens in utero, then both things happen at once. The sciatic nerve prohibition and the fact that it became holy. As long as it happens in utero, they both happen simultaneously. We're going to prove to you now there's a point in time before all the animal was fully formed in utero, before all the bones and the sinews all came together and are fully formed. At that point, there's not going to be a prohibition of a sciatica, and it'll still be holy. So meaning, as long as we find a point in time where there is no sciatica, and but it is holy, we're back to our problem that how can one prohibition go on to another prohibition? Yeah. The fact that it came from a holy animal gave birth to it. The Shlomim gave birth to an animal. So we're saying in utero, it already got a status of holy. You have to wait till it comes out. But we're going to show you now that it's not true that it happens simultaneously. How do I know? The Hatnan by a Nazir, Al Elu Tumas Nazir. So we know that right, he doesn't shave and he's prohibited from wine and he can't come in contact with a corpse. If he does, he got to start over again. So restart, yeah. The Hatnan Al Elu Tumas Nazir Megaleach. On the following impurities, the Nazir has to go and shave, meaning restart his Nazirite process. Al Hames, if he comes in contact with a corpse, the Al Kizayis min Hames, and also even an olive's worth amount of a corpse, if he comes in contact with that, then he has to shave. Now, that's obviously unnecessary to teach him that. Why? The Kashalan Al Kizayis min Hames Megalech Al Kula Lo Koshagen. It makes no sense. If you come in contact with an entire dead person, you have to restart your Nazirus. And even if you come in contact with even an olive's worth, you also have to restart. Okay, so if all you need is an olive's worth, then obviously an entire person will also cause you to restart the Nazirus. So, what do you say? Having the hopers, yeah. Smaller, yeah. So the kashalan ala kizayis when amazing lech al kula koshin. And for sure, for an olive's worth, you have to restart. For sure, for a whole person. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan says Rabbi Yochanan lo nitzcha ella. Oh, so what must the Mishnah be talking about? We're talking about lenefel. A nefel is one who did not survive 30 days. So, what's the word? A stillborn? Aborted. An aborted fetus, okay. An aborted fetus, so it's full. Because, yeah. No. A nefel would be a bad example. And a stillborn means it's a normal person, just didn't survive 30 days. This is talking about it was aborted, prematurely got aborted. So therefore, it comes out in some form of a body enough to impurify you, but the bones and the limbs aren't fully together and formed and connected. And therefore, lo nitzach ela lenefel, shelo nikshru evarav begidin. It's I don't know if they translate in English. It hasn't fully come together and bound. The sinews and the bones and the limbs are all together. It's not like that. It's all a little bit not yet fully still mushy. Yeah. And nikshur means like to tie together. It doesn't mean tied. It means it's fully connected. It's not fully yeah. Yeah, you get the point. Okay. So next page. So Alma, what do you see? What do you see? Even though it's not fully formed, there's no prohibition for the sciatica, but there's still be a prohibition of, let's say, causing impurity. So too over here, Alma, Isser Mukdash and Kadim. So the fact that it could be holy comes first. As long as it's somewhat formed, it'll become. So now, the sacrificial animal that gives birth, so that animal in utero will become holy even before the sciatica is even fully formed. Because we see that you can have a form of a person before the sciatica is fully connected, fully formed into the thigh. And yet it's still enough to cause impurity. So just logical deduction is, just like a preemptive abortion is enough to cause impurity, it's still a person who's considered dead. So too, by sacrifices, as long as it formed on some level, that's already enough to consider it to be a holy sacrifice. And therefore, let's say that would pre-abort. You can't use it for your own benefit. But the sinew has not fully formed into the thigh, and therefore there's going to be no prohibition. So Alma Isser Mukdash and Kadim. And if that's true, so one second, if that prohibition came first of not getting benefit from the sacrifices, so then should be a problem of one prohibition going on to another prohibition. So it says the Gemara, no. Alpha Gav Isser Mukdash and Kadim, also Isser Gid Chayil Alayhu. Even though the prohibition of benefiting from the sacrifice came first, it was there before the sinew was even fully formed into the thigh, into the bone. Still, once it does get fully formed, it'll take effect. Why? It has a certain level of stringency to it. Shekain Isur Noheg Bibnei Noach. That its prohibition, it does not mean its prohibition applies to non-Jews. It means is a prohibition applied even before the Jews had a full status of Jews, which is a whole fascinating literature about from questions from all over the place about the Jews' status before Har Sinai. So there's proofs back and forth, So obviously they were not like non-Jews, but there's different proofs, like let's say over here, that they weren't 100% bound by all the same, bound the same way as Jews, and we know that they did in conversion. I think Gemara increases that they did a conversion by Har Sinai. So the prohibition of the sciatica applied to Jews before they got the Torah. It applied from Yaakov and Esav, from that point on. So they had a status just like nowadays. You can imagine, a non-Jew keeping the 7 mitzvahs that he's supposed to keep. That's a different status than than someone who doesn't keep it. So the Jew status was somewhere in between a Ben Noach and a Jew. So the point is that the sciatica applied even beforehand. So that's a level of stringency, as we'll see later on. So therefore, it has a level of stringency. So that's one of the rule breakers. It can also apply to when there's already a prohibition there. If the second prohibition has a stringency to it, it will apply. Now it says the Gemara. One second. This idea that the prohibition applied to us beforehand is only the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Man shamislei ha'isvara Rabbi Yehuda. That's Rabbi Yehuda. The Hamas Nisan delok Rabbi Yehuda. But our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. So you made a whole nice case according to Rabbi Yehuda, but our Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda. How do I know that our Mishnah does not accord with Rabbi Yehuda? The Katani noeg bebehema ubechaya b'yerech shel yamin ub'yerech shel small. It says that the sciatic applies by an animal, domestic or wild, and it says by the right thigh and the left thigh. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, it only applies by one of them, either the right or the left, not both of them. So, therefore, this is also not a good suggestion because it ends up being that, according to your suggestion, the Mishnah has to be Rabbi Yehuda because he's the one who holds that the prohibition applied to the Jews before they got the Torah. That's only Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, but the Mishnah says it applies by both thighs, and that's not Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So says the Gemara, a common answer, even though it's not our go-to, but that our Mishnah, meaning Rabbi Yehuda Nasi felt, our Mishnah was it's a hybrid. On the one hand, it goes like Rabbi Yehuda that prohibition applied even before we got the Torah. At the same time, it disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda and states that it applies by both. Okay. So, Eimar Deshamis Rabbi Yehuda Bitmeya the Isser Lav Kachim the Isser Kares Mishamislay. This idea that the sciatica is so stringent that it even applied before we got the Torah, and therefore, even though there's another prohibition on the animal, let's say, for example, Aver Minachai, you can't eat from the animal while it's alive. So now it gets a sciatica. So maybe you should say you can't have two prohibitions on one animal. You'll say, no, this is very strict because it applied before we got the Torah, and therefore it'll apply on the animal, even though the animal had already another prohibition, a negative prohibition. So, yeah. Okay, it's interesting. Oh, okay, yeah, Tosas. Okay, another reason why why this can't be Rabbi Yehuda, our Mishnah, is because the Mishnah says that the prohibition applies when the animal's in utero. Rabbi Yehuda says it does not apply when it's in utero. So, according to Rabbi Yehuda, let's say, for example, let's say according to Rabbi Yehuda, some prohibitions apply. Not this one, but some prohibitions apply when the animal's in utero. So, but the sciatica is only going to apply once it's born. So, the sciatica is still going to apply to those cases, but that's only when those cases are a regular prohibition of just a regular negative commandment that'll get you lashes. But kachim, in our case, where the shlomim gave birth or the chatas gave birth to an animal, that prohibition of benefiting from a holy animal, from a sacrifice, that's an Isser Kares. So, Mishamisle, where did you ever find that such a strict prohibition like Kares? Rabbi Yehuda will say that the prohibition of the sciatica will also apply there. So meaning, let's say Rabbi Yehuda agrees that when an animal is holy and it's pregnant, that there's a prohibition already in the womb for the pregnant animal. Meaning, if you would slaughter that animal and find the pregnant animal inside, let's say Rabbi Yehuda would agree that that's prohibited to get benefit from because it already became sanctified in the womb. But that animal has an Isser Kares on it. That's a very strict prohibition. So maybe if that animal, doesn't get aborted and it actually the mother gives birth to it, now you want to know, does the sciatica prohibition exist? We never found Rabbi Yehuda saying that the sciatica being so strict will prohibit an animal that has a pre-existing kares prohibition. That we never found. We only found that it'll prohibit an animal with a pre-existing negative prohibition that doesn't carry with it the prohibition of kares. So the Gemara rejects this whole opinion. Next opinion must be the Mishnah is talking about Elahacha b'mivkaris askinan b'mivcharis askinan. We're talking about a bechor, and a bechor, certain animals have a holy status. If they're a firstborn animal, then they are holy from when they are born, not in the womb, only when they're born. The berechem, it's only going to be sanctified once it is born. And now what happens? Once it's born, it's one second. Oh, okay. So now, no matter how you go, there's going to be the prohibition of the sciatica nerve here. Why? So, if you hold that it can apply by a uterus, by a fetus. Sorry, if you hold that there's the prohibition of the sciatica applies to a fetus, which is two opinions of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, then for sure you understand that the sciatica came first, and then the stricter prohibition of a bechor, which is sanctity, came second, and it'll prohibit it. And if you hold that the sciatica does not apply when it's to a fetus, so then once it gave birth to it, both came simultaneously. The prohibition of the bechor, you have to redeem it. The prohibition of the bechor, the being the firstborn, and the sciatica came at the same time. They came simultaneously. So either way you go, it's going to be. Sorry, I misspoke for a second. Either way you go, the whole question of the Gemara was, of course, the sciatica nerve prohibition applies to a sacrificial animal. Why would it not apply? Why would it leave? So we're saying now we're talking about a bechor, a firstborn holy animal, which only becomes holy once it comes out of the womb. So either way you go, if the sciatica applied when it was in the womb, so then it still applies. It never goes away. And if it only applies when the animal came out of the womb, so then it comes simultaneously, the sciatica and the prohibition of the firstborn, so it's still there. So both of those cases, either way you go, the sciatica still applies, is still there, and it's not going to go away. And therefore, when our Mishnah said the sciatica applies to sacrifices, it was referring to a firstborn which is sanctified. And either way you slice it, whether it's sciatica prohibition applies in utero or not, it's still going to be on this animal because it didn't go anywhere. And that's what we're talking about. So the Berechem Kadosh, yeah. The Ibayis Ema, or alternatively, another answer is we're talking about Vlados Kachim and Bahava Yasan Hen Kedoshim. We're talking about, our Mishnah is talking about not a Bechor, a regular sacrificial animal that gave birth, except our Mishnah is telling you that I hold that the animal only becomes holy, not in utero, when it's born. It only becomes holy when it's born. Before we made an assumption it becomes holy in utero. Now we're saying the Mishnah could hold, another answer would be that when a shlamim or a chatas or an ola gives birth, that animal only becomes sanctified when it comes out of the womb. So now, same thing. If you hold the sciatica applies in the womb, so it was there already when it was born. So it's for sure still there. And if you say it does not apply in the womb, doesn't apply in utero, then once the animal comes out, it simultaneously takes effect with its sanctity, and therefore it's still on the animal, and it doesn't go anywhere. So either way you slice it, whether the Mishnah is talking about a bechor or a regular sacrifice who gave birth, and the holiness only kicks in, not in utero, but once it comes out of the womb, either way you go, that could be the case of our Mishnah. Amar Bichia Bar Yosef Osham Ala Kachim Hanechalin of Al Kachim Hanechalin Ein Iser Gid Anash Ein Iser Noah Ein Iser Gid Noeg Behen. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Echad Kachim Hanechalin Echad Kachim Hanechalin Iser Gid Noeg Behen. Debate Rabbi Chia, the son of Yosef, and Rabbi Yochanan. This prohibition of the sciatic nerve by sacrifices, does it only apply to sacrifices that are eaten, meaning everything except for an ola? An ola is fully consumed or not? Two opinions. Basically, does the sciatic nerve prohibition apply to a ola? Yes or no? Amar of Papa, they're not arguing. Below pligi, they're not arguing. Kan lehalkoso and kan lehaloso. They're just pointing out that you are going to get lashes if you eat it. So that everyone agrees to. If you eat it, you will get lashes. And that which we say that there's no prohibition, it means that there's no prohibition to put up the sciatica on the altar. So we're going to see if it's attached or detached, meaning do you have to detach the sciatic nerve before you put the ola onto the altar, or we'll see tomorrow, I guess. Or if it got detached, you have to place it back on. So these two opinions aren't arguing. Everyone agrees if you were to eat the sciatic nerve of an ola, you get lashes, and everyone agrees that there's no prohibition for an ola offering to put the sciatic nerve on to the altar. You don't have to. You don't have to remove it. Okay, 47. We'll stop there. This was a mouthful. It got hard all of a sudden. Yeah.